Hey guys, welcome to the second deep dive into Project Unknown. Today, we're going to be going over our inventory system, and I'm just going to give you a basic example and rundown of it, and then we'll go and explaining the code later. So, just choose a thing. You can see some updated, but if we press tab, we have our inventory. Now, this inventory is equipped with a few items. We have 12 stone here and 5 stone here. We can move these items around the inventory as much as we want. We can't move the player, but the game is still running. So if I walked out and then I ran it, you see our infection meter going up. So let's head back into the bunker. Now, if we see, we have one stack up here. Let's put the 12 down here and the 5 up there. Then we pick up the stone. It gets added to the 5. It's now 6. Then if we drag them, they add together. And that's the basic gist over the inventory system. Now let's get into the actual code. So as you can see in the background, there is going to be a time lapse of me actually coding and creating the inventory system. You guys can just watch that while I explain just 2 little items of our inventory system. Now we have our inventory item, which is a resource. This resource has a name, a texture, and a max stack size. This is used to give items their name, their texture, and their max stack size, because we want different items to have different stack values, and we also want, different names. Our second one is inventory slot. This has an item which is of the type inventory item, so it's of our resource type, and it also has an item quantity, so we know how many of that item we have in each slot. Now, throughout our code, we have more stuff, but there's one more resource, and I'll actually get into the code of it during the rest of it, but it has one thing that's relative now is we have a slots, which is an array of our inventory slot type. Now, let's get into the actual code. Okay, so here's the inventory class I was just talking about, our resource. Now you can see we have our signal, and this is the slots I was talking about. So let's get into the actual code of this. So if we look in here, we have our insert function, and running through it, we have our item slots, which is a lambda expression. No, that's not lambda. I don't remember what it's called, but we're taking our array of slots, we're filtering it by our slot item, and we're setting that to slot.item because in our inventory our slot, I'll get into that. Now, if the item slot is not empty, we take the item slot at our position and we add one to the quantity. So that means if we're walking over and we have an existing one. Now, if the slot is empty, so the only other thing is the slot is empty, we get that same item, but we return null. So there is no item. So if this is not empty, so basically if this returns null, so if this exists, we set our item to the item and we set our quantity to 1. So this is if we were to run our game and we had just one item. Now, then we emit our update, which this we'll get into later. Now let's go to the move item. This is our drag and drop system. Now this is a little bit complicated, so it might take me a second. So our function move item. So we have a from index and a to index. This is just the slot it's from and the slot is going. So basically it's saying if we're going out of bounds, just stop, return to the place. It doesn't matter if we're going out of bounds there. And then if we're putting it in the same spot, it's not going to change. Now we have our from slot and our to slot, which is our slots of our from index, because our index is going to be a specific number. So this slot at this number is our slot, our from and our to. So this is creating a new slot. So if our slot to item is null, so we don't have an item in that slot, our to slot item becomes our from slot item. So it moves the item over, and then our quantity moves over so that labels change, and then our from slot becomes empty because obviously who would want multiple? That's just duplication. Now this is adding to an existing stack. This one is a little more tricky in terms of code, but it really isn't all that bad. So if our 2-slot item is our front slot item, now we need the total amount. So our slot total is our 2-slot quantity plus our front slot quantity, because as we check here, if our 2-slot quantity, so our total slot quantity is greater than our max stack size, then we have an excess. So this is, we're setting it to that. And then the player has excess. So I actually don't have an example of this, but I can show you. Actually, let's just make that example real quick. So if we go to our player and we open up our inventory, we can see, so let's just see here, we have stone at the 45th quantity. Now if we run our game, we have stone at 45. Now I actually haven't tried this, so let's see. Boom. It works. We can't add to it because our max stack size is 45. So yeah. Now that is an issue, but I'll fix that. See, not everything is perfect, so that was a good test. Anyway, now our 2 slots. So if these are different, so sorry, if it's under. So if it's not, then we're just removing them for that and then adding it. Now this one is if we're adding slots of different stuff. So if we get our temporary item, a temporary quantity, which is our 2-slot item, and then we switch them, and then we switch them here. So we're just switching the items from the slot, which I don't actually have a thing to test. But let's go into inventory slot. This is our actual inventory slot. So we have a custom cursor, our item icon, our item quantity, slot index, and a player inventory, because we kind of need that. In our process, this is just setting our cursor to be our custom cursor, as you can see here. So this is by default, but when we run this in the dragging, it has to change. So I don't know why that's not working, but oh, I know. That's why. Anyway, now we have our update. So if we don't have a slot item, we don't want our icon to be visible, and we don't want our quantity to be visible, because why would you want that why would you want a random item icon and a random value? Now we have, so if we are making a slot, so if we're updating our slot and something's getting added, we set the icon to true, and then we set the texture, we set the quantity to true, and then we set the text of that label to our item quantity. That's set to a string. This is the code for the drag and drop. It's a Godot built-in function. So our slot is equal to our player inventory slot at our slot index, which, yeah. So if the item on our slot is null, we return null. So we're not dragging anything. Then our item drag data is of base index and slot index. So that's our base index here. Then our drag item is text direct. So we're making a new item. We're setting it to our slot item, the texture, and we're setting our size to the specific size I have set in there. And then this is just it's kind of redundant, but it's just a failsafe. Then we add that to a container. We create a container, sorry. Then we add it to a container. And then we set the position to a specific offset. And then we set our drag preview to that, and then we return our item drag data. Then in our drop data, also a built-in Godot function. Yeah, we get our our data index is of our base index of type data. Then our data move index is our slot index. So then we are at player.move item data index data move index. So this is our from and our to index. Then it comes back around. Now here is our inventory UI. So this is just setting our UI. So we have our player inventory and our slots, which is the children of our. Actually, I don't have the scene up. Let me open it real quick. Of our inventory scene. So all these are the children of this grid. So, and we have is open set to false. So on our ready, we connect the updated signal from the inventory. So we connect this signal. Then for the range of our inventory slots, we set the slot index to I. So 0 gets 0, 1 gets 1, all the way up to 32 gets indexed at 32. And then our slot inventory slot, that player inventory. So it should be this. Yeah, we're setting to our player inventory. And then we're updating our slots. So we're just calling that function, which is down here. Now, upon every frame, we check if we pressed our inventory button, which is set to tab. If our inventory is open, if the is open is equal to false, so by default, so it's not open, we make it visible and we set is open to true. Now, if it is open, then we set visible to false, and then is visible to false. And then our update slot is going to be, so for I, in the range of the minimum of our slot.item size, so we get the lowest. So we take our player inventory dot slots dot size, and we take our inventory slots dot size. We update that slot to be what the player inventory slot is. So we're just updating our inventory slots to what the player's inventory slots are. And that's basically how my inventory system works. Now, obviously, I'm going to have to fix that little bug that we talked about, but that's about it. And thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.